Thanks for being here. It's great to talk about newspapers. It's a sad story too often, but it's been a great career for me to be in the newspaper business, and particularly newspaper business, and not just media. And we're going to focus on newspapers because we're among newspaper readers, I believe, looking from the age of everybody. My name is Tom Honig. I was at the Sentinel for a total of 35 years through started in 1972 and it lasted until 2007, which, as it turns out, is a real watershed year in newspapers. Uh, I started, it's kind of the old-fashioned story. I started as a beginning reporter, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that because Santa Cruz was quite different then in 1972. The university had only been open for 7 years. The town was very different, small town, still voted Republican, as a matter of fact. And so everything was set in motion then, and I lasted through the 80s, the 90s, and I really could not believe, even as late as 2007, when it got into a situation where we were losing staff and it was getting kind of hard to work there, that I lasted, and it made it all the way in 1992 as named executive editor. And that's an unusual story these days because people don't last at the same newspaper a long time. And very few of us rose up from the beginning. There were changes in the industry. And so anyway, that's going to be the angle that I'm taking it from. And I'd like you to meet Louise Yarnall, who has a slightly different story.
Yeah. So, and actually, yeah, so we've been married for some time now. But I was a reporter starting in 1984 in the Los Angeles area, basically Southern California. And my career path was very different, but very typical for that era. I worked for 4 different newspapers through 1995. So that's 11 years, 4 different newspapers. I worked as a city reporter, a general assignment reporter for the Outlook in Santa Monica for 7 of those years. That paper no longer exists. We'll talk more about all that. But Santa Monica is a community that's very similar in some ways to Santa Cruz. Also, it was a really interesting time before I went back to grad school in 94 at UCLA. I got to cover the 92 riots with Rodney King. I got to cover the 1994 earthquake, and then the preliminary hearing with O.J. Simpson. So I had some kind of cool stories to cover. And then I worked as a stringer for the LA Times West Side Suburban section when I started grad school. I knew a lot of the people. They used to be my competitors. And then they shut it down. I was still thinking, maybe I'm going to hang in, I'll get a master's degree and go back and work for a big newspaper somewhere. But when they shut down the suburban section, we all went out to drinks somewhere in Venice, and they said, Louise, get the hell out. There's no pot of gold at the end of this rainbow. So I worked as a freelancer for the New York Times through 99, and then haven't really done journalism since. But I had a lot of good experiences.
And so I'm curious. I assume I was right when I observed that we're in a newspaper crowd, are we not? Are most everybody? How many are familiar with Santa Cruz and Santa Cruz in the 70s, 80s, and that's great. When somebody would tell you now, gee, what was the Sentinel like? What would come to your front of your mind?
You can be honest.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
It was a state-old reporting conservative.
Well, that was the reputation of it. Well, we'll probably get into that. When I showed up in 1972, Santa Cruz, as I said, was a far different location, and newspapers were really the only alternative for people interested in local news.
Sorry, go ahead, please. No.
Local news is what we're going to be focusing on during these 4 classes, and local news at the time was honestly a lot of fun to cover. And I had arrived in town. I was 24 years old. I walked into the Sentinel office. I met Scotchy Sinclair. I don't know if anybody remembers. Gordon Scotchy Sinclair was the editor at the time. And he had a desk in the corner of the newsroom. There was papers stacked up over his head. All you could see was his bald head from sitting there. And I walked in, he said, come in. He called me and said, in fact, he talked to my mom. I was living at home. He called my mom and she said, Mr. Sinclair wants you to show up at 9:30 tomorrow morning. So I'm there at 9:30. At 9:40, he comes walking in and he sits down, looks, kind of eyes me over the stack of papers. And he said, I've got a job on the police beat for you. It's one you're not qualified for, but I'll give you a shot at it. Pays $150 a week. When can you start? And I said, well, anytime. And he said, well, not today. Well, it turns out I did work that day. I went right to work. I learned how to place fire calls. I learned how to get the court calendar, find out who had been driving drunk around town. And I'm a reporter. And so that's how it all started for me. What was incredible about Santa Cruz and also the newspaper business at that time was, well, we had a lot of characters in the newsroom, old-time characters who had been there for many years. But the thing about them was there was an ethic that as I was preparing for this class, and Louise and I were discussing an awful lot of things, what was it like in those early days? And it really came back to me. And what came back to me was the reporters all knew people in town. I couldn't make a phone call. Somebody would say, well, say hi to Don Righetti for me, or say hi to Wally Wood, or Wally Trabing was just over at my house. Wally Trabing, of course, was the columnist. And I had the honor of editing him, which is one hell of a job, let me tell you. Wally, there was another copy editor who used to keep score on and double checking his grammar. The copy editor said it was a tie score, that Wally made as many mistakes as. In fact, one day I walked over to his desk and I said, Wally, I'm going to teach you the difference between lie and lay. And he said, doesn't anybody get to lay down anymore?
So Tom, should I go over the outline and?
Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you do that?
So yeah, this is what we're going to be doing over the next 4 classes. So today we're going to focus on the old days when we're going to give you the insider's view, what it was like to be covering a community. That's sort of like the happy story. Class 2 is when we're going to reflect on how news has evolved, particularly local news. That's going to be a lot about the business model and how it kind of started to go away. Class 3 is when we're going to talk about your current news media sources, both local and beyond, how that whole landscape has changed, how people navigate it. And then in class 4, based on everything we've talked about, we're going to talk about brainstorming and thinking about strategies for tracking news to stay civically involved and informed. So that's the big picture.
Yeah, and I think the goal of the whole thing, especially when we get to part 4, is we've got a situation here where, and then what I started to describe is a newspaper in a small town that pretty much everybody read, and there was a lot of common knowledge in society. Well, we all know that's going away, and certainly on the national level, people can't sit and listen to each other. And in my day, which I'm old enough to say in my day, that wasn't the case, because there was some agreed on truths and agreed on ways of living, and certainly some ethic at Santa Cruz. There was plenty of room for disagreement. We'll get into that as the university became more powerful in town. But I think that behind all that is this issue of how are we going to replace local news, local dialogue, local agreements, responsible information coming through. Where do we get it? How do you pay for it? Is some of the part of it. So
yeah, and
that's where we're at.
We did want to just check in with anyone who's willing to volunteer. Like, why did this class appeal to you? What are you hoping to get from it? Maybe just a couple of comments. Yes.
As a longtime Sentinel subscriber, I'm disturbed by how much it costs now to get the paper version.
Yes,
And looking at what's coming up, it's like, it's gonna be worth it to continue to do that.
exactly.
great.
Yeah,
That's great.
thank you.
My first job was in high school. I wrote for the Sacramento Union.
Oh.
And I've been a devotee of newspapers ever since at 25 cents a column inch.
Yeah.
So I had half a paper.
Nice.
So I worked with them for about 9 years.
Okay.
And you've been a journalism teacher.
So no, I'm into it. And I think it's a shame we're not, promoting more active news.
Yep.
Well, I was at a lower level. I sold newspapers on the streets of the Imperial Valley Post Press. And I got a paper out, then I got a job in the newsroom, but as a gopher, as
Yeah.
getting stuff and cleaning up after everybody left and running the switchboard, which at that time had plug-in things still.
Yeah.
And, so very primitive. And what you just reminded me of was that if you didn't hold that plug-in right, if you put your finger a little bit too far forward, you get a smile shock. And anyway, I love the newspaper, and I could see how the reporters worked hard, did a story, it was all finished, and the press started running, but then they had to think about the next day.
Mhm.
Right.
And that always impressed me, and I thought I'd become a newspaper reporter, but then I did not, and did something else.
Yeah. You found out how much they were paid and you got smart. Yes.
But I've been involved, volunteer in newspapers since Sundays, Independent, Adventure.
Oh, great.
alternative Newspapers, over a half dozen. We can't hear her back here. Oh, that's the problem.
Alternative newspaper
Yeah.
involvement. Yes.
Back to Sundays and Independent.
Fantastic. That helps the whole ecosystem. Yeah. Thank you. And
So I took this class mainly because I've been so disturbed in seeing the way that news has evolved into everybody getting their own news and not having it
Right.
their
yeah,
reality.
yeah.
And I don't know if there's going to get back to that or not.
I know. We'll talk about that. Not today. Today we're going to be in the bubble. It will come up. I did want to take a quick survey, just show of hands. And there are just 3 of these questions. So what form of media do you use the most today, right now? Network television, cable, raise your hands, network television. Okay, no hands. Cable television. Okay, got a few more hands. Newspapers, online or paper. Oh, wow. Okay, so maybe I shouldn't be surprised. We definitely have our target group here. Magazines, online or paper? Okay, a lot of readers here. Okay. Long form social media, podcasts or blogs. Okay, and that I actually look a lot of that now. Short form social media, X, Blue Sky, Truth Social. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Now, again, if we were talking to a slightly different demographic group, we'd see very different responses, and that will go to the business model. We'll talk more about that.
When I stand television and what I use PBS NewsHour every day through.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Louise,
Sure.
someone is asking me if you go into presentation mode, is that necessary? What do you think?
And it will be after the video. It's a technical glitcho, and I apologize for the people online. We'll get there. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry you're seeing you're seeing our slip, which we don't want to be showing. But anyway, which of the following types of news do you follow the most? Local, like here in Santa Cruz, okay. State, California. Okay, we got a couple here. National. Me too. I know, right? That's international. Okay, okay. And is any other? Is there another category that I missed that people are like, you didn't mention me? Okay. And then the final question, this is getting into almost like what the sections are and used to be in a newspaper, and that is which topic areas do you follow the most? And government and politics. Okay, that's me too. Sports. Tom should raise his hand. Business. Okay. lifestyle. I like that stuff. And arts and entertainment. I write like that. Food. I'm a foodie. And hobbies and home, like gardening and things like that. Yeah. Okay. Anything else that I should? Letters to the editor, opinion. I did. Oh my gosh, Tom, I forgot the most important section.
Yeah, police blotter.
Police blotter, crime, crime. Yeah, exactly. So, all right. So we're gonna turn to the olden times, the old days. And some of this in here did involve a little research using ChatGPT, not much, but just so you know, full disclosure. But we're going to start with back in the 70s in Santa Cruz. And Tom told you a little bit about his first story. And there's Scotchy Sinclair, and that's his actual desk. I don't know if you can see that.
And that's a very impressive young men's press pass there.
And that's your very first story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was down at Seacliff Beach. And the fishermen were taking a lot of anchovies out of the water, and the local fishermen were not happy about it. So that was a little dust up. Funny thing about that story, the next day I picked up the San Francisco Examiner, and virtually the same story ran on the back page. And come to find out that the Wire editor, whose name I don't want to mention, but it was Arnold Wechter, had retyped my story and sent it into Examiner, and he got $50 for it. So you kind of were on your own in a way. But I do want to go back to, if I can.
Yeah, go back and talk about
Huh?
Say the headline.
Yeah.
fishermen tangle lines over the anchovy haul. Yeah.
Well, when I think back to that, that first 6 months at the newspaper were unbelievable, because I found, as I think I said before, an ethic among the people who were working there, that they knew the town, they knew the people, everybody knew everybody, it seemed, in town. I'd make an appointment to interview somebody, and somebody at the paper would know that I was going. And I guess my best story about that is on the first week, I was invited out to the Santa Cruz Hotel with the gang after work. And I sat there, I said, "Oh, I'm so excited to be here." And one of the older reporters said, "Well, what are you working on?" And I said, "Oh, well, I got an assignment to do a feature on the jail and the situation in the jail." And I said, "Yes, I'm talking to Supervisor Phil Harry about it next week. I made an appointment." And the reporter looked at me and he said, "Why next week?" And he said, "Well, that's when he wanted to do it." And he said, that's bullshit. Hey, Phil. And he turns around at the bar, and Phil Harry is sitting at the bar with the Santa Cruz Hotel. I mean, that's what it was like. That wasn't an unusual. But with it went, I guess the thing that is, as I look back, is talking to people in the town. There was broad agreement about major things, and even as no growth became a big issue, and price of housing and traffic and all that stuff, people were kind of singing off the same
Hymnal.
The hymnal. People understood what the issues were, and either you were for something or against something. And there was talk, as somebody had mentioned, about the reputation of the Sentinel as being pretty conservative, which in those days was usually considered to be pro-growth. That seemed to divide the issue. Of course, today, look what's happening in downtown Santa Cruz. It's kind of mind-boggling to look back on that. Mm-hmm. But that sort of ordinary life disappeared about 1 month into my stint here, which is when the Santa Cruz murders started happening. And I think for anybody who's been around any length of time, that was a really stressful period. And I had been a reporter for about a month, or maybe even less. And all of a sudden I'm covering the major story of the day. And this was the story that was bringing people from other areas. And you talk about a media horde. It's interesting looking back on it. The media horde was almost nothing in those days. It was about 5 reporters, but we had a lot of local reporters. We had, and the star of them all, of course, was Marge Von B at the Register Pavaroni. And I don't know if anybody remembers Marge. I learned virtually everything I know about reporting from Marge. We were rivals. She, as we covered, there were three big murder cases that I knew about directly. First one was John Linley Frazier. Are people familiar with that? It was a very tragic case involving Dr. Oda. I don't know if you remember, they were slain up in the hills above SoCal. I was not here for that story. The next two came along were Herbert Mullen and Edmund Kemper. And I can only describe the community as sort of in shock during those years. And I took it upon myself. I realized that I was the basic source of information. Another reporter told me one day, he said he was up in Boulder Creek when the newspaper arrived with the latest. We were an afternoon paper in those days. And the trucks would arrive and there would be people literally waiting on the corner to get the latest in the story. As an afternoon paper, we had that morning's news. So a court hearing would end at noon. We'd have it in the paper by 2 o'clock and spread out throughout the afternoon to the whole community. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about that people felt there was an urgent need for information. What's the latest? Is there a wild man? Is there somebody who was arrested? And of course, as we all know, there were a couple people that were responsible, and the community sort of took it in stride. We outside of town, we were known as the murder capital of the world. It didn't feel that way inside, and I took it my responsibility to kind of keep things cooled down during that period. I think about that in the context of today, when it seems like most information is flowing from the public to the public, and people are not relying on what I was, which was a paid reporter out witnessing something so that I could tell the story later, whether that was a crime, whether that was something unexpected, whether that was like happened one day. I don't know how many people remember this, but in the early 70s, there was a proposal for a North Coast section to Santa Cruz, which would have brought in about 30,000 people additionally in Santa Cruz. I mean, it's shocking to look back on that. And I happened to be in the city. I was covering for somebody else at the city council meeting that day. And I think it was the planning commission said, well, that project is off. Nobody's gonna do it. Overnight, 30,000 people gone from what we thought was gonna happen. Of course, most people were happy about it. But all that was reported. I honestly didn't know the significance of that story until some other reporters came in and explained it to me. And that was the advantage of a larger newsroom, which frankly you don't have today. In the newsroom, you had somebody who had been on that story, somebody who could help you. And I want to throw this in, if I can. We didn't plan for it, but there is one person in a newsroom that is really important and is basically unknown by the public, and that is the city editor. City editor is basically like a shop foreman, where nobody beneath him likes him, nobody above him likes him. He's running the damn paper, he's getting the paper out.
Or she.
And there were some really tough ones. But the city editor was the person who really was most responsible for the news of any newspaper. I was really lucky. I had a city editor by the name of Jim Kruger, who set my career on course. And I learned so much from him. I still learn from him. He's long gone. He went to work he got mad at Scotchy Sinclair and walked out one day and went to work at the Mercury News. But we kept in touch, and he passed away a couple of years ago. But some of these people loom large in my life as I look back on it. And I think they're important to the newspaper. And now you're in a different situation in LA. You're a beginning reporter, and we're 10 years later.
Yeah. But I don't have anything to add to that, except that the city editor is super important. You're not usually in when you're a reporter, and I was a reporter my whole career. I actually didn't want to go into management. I didn't want to be in one of the glass offices. I just wanted to be out covering things. But the city editor is in charge of sort of handing out some stories. Also, you pitch your story to the city editor. And then when you come back and you shape the story, the city editor is the first person who's going to look at it and say, hey, let's try a different lead, or let's try to ask some more. You need to ask some more questions. Yes.
Not in the same.
Sentinel, yeah.
At the Sentinel, not in the same role. There is, they call him managing editor for news. And he does a lot of editing, but to be honest, the local knowledge is not there. The history is not there. He's a good guy. He tries hard, but he doesn't know very much about the area, honestly. And that the city editor was not only important by position, but every city editor that I ever knew was sharp. And
Yeah.
they had different styles. Some were mean, some were overly nice and gentlemanly, like Jim Kruger, but nasty when he had to be. The old phrase is, if you're a good newspaper editor, you run a democracy early in the morning, but as closer to deadline, you become a totalitarian. And that you have to have somebody who can adapt their personality to that. So really, honestly, I can't say. I don't know, possibly at the San Francisco Chronicle, I'm sure there's somebody like that. But this goes back, I've read a book about the 20s. There were strong people. There were one city editor, in fact, murdered another reporter. It was sent to prison, and that's a little excessive, I think.
Yeah, that's a little, just ever so slightly. But yeah, and we will talk about what's changed. Today, we're gonna keep it a little bit happy talk, but here, let me, so this is the reason I haven't put it into, we wanted to show this little snippet of a movie from 1951 called Deadline USA. And I hope the sound is good. But this is basically a reader whose daughter has been murdered. And she is coming to this newspaper editor, Humphrey Bogart, and saying, hey, I'm going to share my information with you. And you'll see what she says about what a newspaper means to her.
I know this paper. I come to America. I wish to be good citizen. How to do this? From a newspaper. It shows me how to read and write. My Bessie does. You do not say bad things of her. You do not show bad pictures of her. You try to find who hurt my Bessie. Good. I help. I think what to do. I go on Subway. I ride all day. I think.
By doing this, you may be in danger, like your son.
You're not afraid. Your paper's not afraid.
I just wanted to share that because Tom and I wound up watching this whole movie and we loved it, right? We just had a great time watching it. I will switch to this version now. At least how do I swap it so that?
Yeah, swap, what is this, use slideshows, click on the top there.
I might need your help.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure.
What's the name of the movie?
Deadline USA.
USA.
So, yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
You're seeing my notes.
Going
which I
back and
don't.
looking at newspaper movies is interesting because as you go through time, sometimes there were the heroes,
Interesting.
other times were the evil people who were doing
Wow.
damage to people. And it often goes with what's happening in the
Physical,
business. And
This part.
you know, right now, as a lot of you are showing, this is a tough time for the business, and the reality is I don't think the kind of money that it would take to run a fully functioning newspaper is there. I'd add one thing. The written word. When I was first at the newspaper, I think everybody had a novel in their top drawer. Every reporter was working on a novel. We talked about writing a lot. We talked about good writing, clear writing. And it's different today. And that I don't think, some of the things that we're going to be presenting later is going to show it's not just where you get your news, but how you get your news. And reading a story is far different from listening to the radio or God help me, watching CNN and having people hurl insults at each other.
Yeah. Well, I did want to get into a little bit. You saw how that her level of trust and faith in the newspaper and how she looked at it in the time. And look, we were in newsrooms. We understand that most people weren't quite at that level of trust. But I thought we could take a quick, again, love to hear any examples of a time that, you didn't trust the paper or, and if that happened, how did you hold your newspaper to account? Maybe some people have a couple stories along those lines. Sorry. Yeah.
If you can, when somebody asks a question,
Repeat it.
Repeat it to the consumers, and you best.
I will. Thank you, Douglas. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Silly stuff. Well, I could see the views when we flew in, and the reporters had been wearing all the wrong color clothes. And I thought, if you can't get the color of the.
So the Beatles reporting
Yes.
misreported the color of the Fab Four's clothing, and that was a real issue. But you didn't give up. You gave the newspaper another chance. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I love it. Any other stories along those lines? Yes.
Well, my parents came from Europe. They always said, never trust newspapers because of their experience.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think they did trust what they read. They would repeat it, talk about it.
Wow. So
That was my experience. When I would talk to people and they'd call to complain about something that we had foibles. We weren't perfect. We're the rough draft of history, if you want to go that way. And mostly, generally, people, unless they had a specific thing that made them angry, were pretty supportive.
yeah. So, and that's interesting that your parents came from Europe and they did not trust the newspapers because what part of Europe did they come from? Was it Germany? Yeah. So yeah, they might have had some bad experiences there.
I think they did rely on newspapers though for information at the same time that they warned us not to trust everything in the newspaper.
Yeah. Be critical. Be
It's
critical
kinda
thinker.
both ways.
Yeah.
I think current, because of all the lawsuits the federal government has placed on the newspaper publications.
Yeah.
That they are frightened
Yeah.
to be able to print the truth. And I really look at some of the publications and doubt what their word is.
Yeah. The chilling effect of lawsuits today is a real concern because you don't know if you can trust.
It's been a concern for a long time, but the other side, the bad guys seem to be winning all of a sudden. That is really frightening. It's always tough. You have to stand up to threats, even on a local level, which I can talk about a little more.
Yeah. So, one more. Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, sometimes I feel like there's specifically more recently, false equivalency, where you've got, one side is lying, outright, facts are completely wrong, and yet the newspaper is giving equal weight to, both sides.
Exactly. And the both side-ism, as they call it, of the journalistic practice can be problematic in the current times.
Well-
When you have one side that seems to be routinely sort of putting out disinformation and lying, and the other side, whatever. Yeah.
You had a question in the back.
Oh, Bill, I was gonna make a comment.
Yeah.
That I've been interviewed twice for newspapers. The first time was a journalism class at a community college. And after I saw the article, I was impressed. I thought, well, they got everything. The other time was down here by the Sentinel. And after I read the article, then I thought, what? I didn't say that.
Uh-oh.
I'm reading in this.
Right. So when you got quoted by the community college journalists, they quoted you accurately. That built trust. And when you were misquoted by the Sentinel reporters, that you didn't trust them as much. Yeah, that's an issue. What did you do anything about it? Did you call the reporter up and say, hey, of course not. Okay. Okay.
I have a couple observations in what you brought up about the both sidisms, which has kind of always been around. When I became editor, one of the rules that such as they are, as to what I really believed in, especially when I was writing editorials, which is a whole different thing, is I felt very strongly that everyone has a right to his or her own opinion. And if we did not reflect somebody accurately, that was a problem. And then that was when we would get into the area of making a formal correction, or even in some cases an apology. But that's a tenet that would work today. And you don't see it on one-sided news stations either way. They make an accusation and you want to say, and who's going to defend the other side? But going back to that principle of everybody has a right to his or her own opinion, I think is important.
Yeah.
I have one other observation when you mentioned about the Beatles. I was, before I got to Santa Cruz, I was covering sports at the Palo Alto Times. And I also kept the official stats for the game. And it was I think it was Buxer versus Pally or something. And as I went off the field, I realized that I hadn't written a touchdown had been scored in the third quarter. And I couldn't remember what the time elapsed was because that went into the box score. So I thought, well, let's make up something. My boss got a call the next day. There were 13 minutes left, not 11 minutes left. Your reporter got it wrong. And he said, I'll make sure he's fired. But I think that we know what happens, and it's more serious, is somebody will do an investigative story that is largely accurate. And down in the 15th paragraph, it'll say Johnson instead of Jackson. And the answer, of course, for the person who's been targeted is, oh, I can't even get the name right. So, you have to look at the degree of accuracy or how important something is. So all these things come into play constantly, but all day long, it just hits you like that. And again, getting comparison to today, we had enough people to handle that. We had enough people with experience. I could rely on the city editor who never shot me, by the way.
So the one thing I thought we would talk about a little bit, I'll start real quickly, but we did have to work to earn community trust, and the spelling of the name, getting somebody's quote right. I mean, this is like the coin of the realm. If you're not getting that stuff straight, then maybe you shouldn't be in the business, honestly. But I really had a sense of that connection to the community when I was working as a local reporter. And honestly, since I was in a big media town, I got to see, I would cover a story and then I'd see how some big publication or an international publication would cover it. And you know what? They can say things. They can get away with glossing things in a very stereotypical way that isn't true to the details and the texture of the community. And they get away with it, and that's the thing. If you don't have your local journalists, who's going to keep them honest? That's my concern now. But anyway, I was working in a very polarized community in Santa Monica. It was easily as polarized as our country is now. We had what they used to call some people called radical rent control. And then we had the whole political group of people who came in with it. And then we had people who represented the business people and the property owners. And I mean, covering that city council, I mean, people would yell at each other. I never saw fisticuffs, but it got pretty nasty and it got pretty personal. And I remember I was in my 20s. I was just looking at this whole thing like, wow. And again, I was a kid. And when this law was passed, I was still in high school in New Jersey. And yet when every source I met, when we were having coffee or whatever, especially the people who were the rent control people, because they hated the newspaper because the former owner opposed the rent control. And they were never going to let forgive us for that. But I wasn't the editor. I was just a reporter, and I couldn't even afford to live in their community. You know what I'm saying? So it was just, I'd sit down with them like, hey, hi, my name's Louise. And right away, they were right down my throat. Like, your paper stinks. I hate this. And they would tell me all the things that they didn't like about the paper and how much they didn't trust me. And so they told me right from the beginning, like, you're going to have to earn my trust because I do not trust you. So I just had to listen. I had to take a lot. I had to take a lot in. And I really had to learn to tell both sides of the story. And I also had to get very used to whenever an issue got very hot, you'd try to tell everyone, make sure everyone was represented. But honestly, it was so hot that some people just couldn't take it when the other side was presented. You know what I'm saying? And they'd call me up and scream at me on the phone and all this other stuff. So I often felt as a reporter that I was in the middle of people's personal fights. And it was a pretty, not a great, I wouldn't take it home, but it really was kind of difficult. But I did build trust over time. And the way I knew I had trust was if both sides liked the story or both sides hated the story. Either one was a good outcome. And then the other thing I wanted to share was we had a lot of, horrible drive-by shootings, terrible crimes. And we had like a Westwood psychologist who was beloved and then she committed suicide. And often we don't cover suicides. But, people want to tell their story. They want to tell their tragic story. Or a toddler who was from the West Side and who was in South Central on July 4th and some drive-by bullets paralyzed this 3-year-old, I think he was about 3 years old, from the waist down for the rest of his life. When you're a reporter, you're coming into people's lives at really, really difficult times. And you have to build that trust, that rapport. You have to sit with them. And that's trust. That's a different kind of trust. And you succeeded when they clip the article, they call you back, they will tell you sometimes, like, thank you so much. I believe I was invited to the funeral, the memorial service of the psychologist, for example. But I just want to share, like, that narrative of the community, that I feel like we are losing that right now. And it breaks my heart. But go on to your, how you built trust.
Well, there. How are we doing on time? Do we need a break or anything?
Typically, in the break is up to 45 minutes, so right about now will be okay.
About 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Okay, let's do
5
it.
minutes, max.
Okay. Oh, you didn't want to talk about your thing before they took a break?
Well, no, well, what am I?
How you
I-
got the trust of the local police? They let you
Oh,
go
yeah.
out
Oh,
and
yeah, that
actually go on calls with them?
Yeah, I got, and that was a tough call. Dealing with the police department or the DA's office, or for that matter, the public defender, you really do have to establish some trust. And I, during the mass murder cases, I was actually often at the staff meetings of the detectives in the morning, when Kemper especially was on the loose. They were at loose ends. They didn't know what to do, and they felt that I was not going to give away any of their trade secrets or any details of the investigation that they felt was necessary. Not every reporter will do that. Each reporter, in my experience, has to negotiate his relationship or her relationship with either the public, the person, the police. The police are, there are some reporters who say, if I know it, I'm going to report it. And there are others who will take background information. And typically in a newsroom, you can have a lot of people who believe differently from each other and they coexist. So I would argue that in the newsroom, you get support for having a wide variety of thinking, which I think addresses what you're saying, where you're just hearing when you're having one side of any situation droned at you all day long. But if we're taking a break, I will tell one great story I have, which is listening to people complaining. And
when you were the editor.
And even when you're a reporter.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
In a small town, what's different about the press now is you can be on the Stairmaster at the gym. You can be going down at Shopper's Corner down getting your groceries. One day I was sitting unusually at Cloud's restaurant at the bar with a friend of mine. And this guy came up and started yelling at me about something. We hadn't supported his reporter. And I listened for a while, and then my friend was next to me. He said, after the guy left, he said, I can't believe that you were so nice to him. And I said, yeah, well, I tend to be ever since we ran his obituary accidentally in the paper. Which was one of our worst mistakes.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
Take a break.
It's Brooks, says everybody gets out of their orders.
No. That's all right. Okay, so we'll have a little moment of sort of nerdiness, I guess. So I wanted to share how, quote, scholars see local journalism's role, and how many people have read, let me see, his famous book was Bowling Alone, by Robert Putnam. This was way back in 1989. And he still continues to work at Harvard. He still is in the public policy journalism, civic space. And he's written some other more recent books that are very interesting about what are we going to do now, But anyway, these are three key points. A decline in local journalism means a decline in civic connection and engagement. And there is a ton of research in this regard. It breaks my heart. But what does local journalism do, right? It builds social capital. That's the academic way of talking about. We're talking about how your schools, what's going on at your local schools, what's happening with zoning and construction and development, elections, public meetings, clubs, churches, volunteer groups. In the Sentinel, I still like that one little bar on the section inside page where they list all the activities. I look at that, and it's one of my coastline.
Yeah.
Thank you. Local journalism increases political knowledge and participation. It actually fosters voter turnout. It supports accountability for local officials. There are so many stories where there's embezzlement. I'm not saying anything about Santa Cruz, but like people, if they're not getting watched and they are close to the money, bad stuff can and does happen. And embezzlement is an actual story that happens all the time at the local level. And if you don't have the watchdogs out there, that kind of stuff is, I think, probably going to happen some more. Local journalism creates a common civic narrative. I was mentioning this earlier. It helps define the community. Who are we? What are our challenges? And who can solve our problems? Like, who can help? The other one I wanted to talk about was Neil Postman. Again, I don't know if people read Amusing Ourselves to Death. Does that one sound familiar? This was way back in 1985, but it it was published many, many times. And he might be a little more for the journalism crowd because he was from Columbia. So the decline in local journalism, it leads to a decline in civic reasoning. So he really sees print media in particular as a way to slow you down and get you to look at the facts and be logical. It fosters rational discourse, logical argument, evidence-based claims, policy engagement. He really questioned, this is back again in the 80s, TV's focus on entertainment, image over substance, emotion over argument, oversimplification. Today, when I take in the news, I'm really struck by, wow, there's a lot more to that story. Hello, that was a cartoon. Hello. And we're supposed to be making decisions based on a cartoon. But anyway, and I love cartoons, nothing against cartoons, but anyway, local journalism provides important documentation. Whenever we're doing any sort of background research on anything, thank goodness I can still look at some clip files from newspapers, and I don't know what's going to happen in the future. But you have the record of the public action. Plus you have the space for public argument, all those letters to the editor that Tom used to review. And then local journalism raises policy awareness, not like, are you in my team and are you against me, or all this sort of polarization, but actually like policy. Here's one idea or set of ideas. Here's the problem. This is how we define it. Here are the ideas for solving it, or one set. Here's another alternative set. That actually is the job, of civics. And I don't know. I don't hear anyone talking about actual policy anymore outside of a print context. So it's supposed to support informed decision making. And that's pretty much all I'm going to do on that. But I wanted to, Tom, did you want to add anything to that before we get to like a little discussion with the class?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
One of the important things that I always felt that a newspaper should do, and unfortunately is not happening very much now, is it's easy to cover the fight. This side says this. We're talking about, again, this even if people who are trying to cover both sides. The reality is there are many sides to an issue. It came up with us big time when they would propose, say, an apartment complex of 300, and the supporters would get up and say, this is good for business. And the opponents would get up and say, you can't do this, the traffic will be terrible, you're ruining our neighborhood. Well, there are other views of it. Those are the two doing this, but there is an issue about water, about zoning, about the future, about what the community wants, what a community doesn't want, whether the governing body has the right to make that vote, all those things. And one of the things that I learned from one of my older compatriots as a reporter was some of these issues, by the time they get into a statement of policy, are very confusing to the point where you might be voting no and actually approving something, or you might be saying yes. They get your brain all wrapped around. And we used to have little sentences that we would throw in saying, it's confusing on the face of it because A, B, C, and you would write down clearly what the issue was. And people reading that story will understand the complexity of it. You can't do that in any other medium but a newspaper, really. And I guess my other reaction to the research that you're talking about is, flew out of my head, whatever.
Oh, well, it will come back.
Yeah, it'll come
Okay,
back.
and when it comes back, bring it back. So we did want to actually, we're talking about the olden times, and we wanted you all to think back to your earliest experiences with local journalism, and we've heard some of them already. It could be your local newspaper. It could even be local television. Remember back when they had these little rinky-dink TV stations, and you could be on your local TV station. I'd love to hear some of your experiences with them and what you learned about how to engage in your community. And Tom and I think we wanted to start,
Yeah.
and your story is, we had 4 newspapers coming to your house.
Yeah, when I was a kid, we had in the morning we had the Chronicle usually, afternoon Palo Alto Times, New York Times came by mail, and my dad would bring home the old San Francisco News, which is where I learned about dirty columns like John J. Miller and Earl Wilson and all the showbiz stuff. So my feeling on newspapers was that when it was in the family practice of reading papers, if they were coming into the house, that was a good thing because you'd end up reading all sorts of stuff, especially sports.
And you also were an athlete.
Yeah, I mean, I got covered in, yeah.
You were a swimmer and a water polo player, and I've read often about in those old clips that your mom saved of the Honig brothers, and they called you Little Tommy in the newspaper.
Still called.
And then you said you actually would see them on the sidelines. And
I'd be at a football game and I'd look down and there's the Palo Alto Times reporter, and I would go up to him and talk to him. How do you cover the game? It was great. It was really easy, person to person. It's like now. I mean, if you can find there are just fewer reporters than there used to be. There were 10 of us crawling all around town. Now there are 2 maybe.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Are there 2?
Some days
So
there are.
sad.
What I was going to say earlier is, I think what has happened, and I think maybe what kind of those guys are driving at, is you have to work at getting spare information. You can't it's not going to drop in your lap anymore.
No.
And I think probably a lot of people in this room are pretty good about seeking out what is accurate and what isn't accurate. But I don't know about younger people. It scares me a little bit.
Right.
But if you're in my case, it's the reason we brought it up. With 4 newspapers coming into the house, I was very used to it, and we had the radio on for the radio news. I didn't need the TV for anything really, except cartoons.
Right. I have a little story too, where my mom, before she got married, she worked as a layout artist in New York for 17 magazine. And so I grew up knowing about layout, for example, and fashion illustration, and that there was this whole process of, and when they moved, she got married and they moved to Altoona, Pennsylvania, it's kind of the middle of nowhere. She wound up working as a fashion illustrator for the local department store. And that was part of their display ads that used to be in every newspaper and helped underwrite the business model. When I entered art contests or I got on the honor roll, it was in my local newspaper, right? That stuff was listed. It was kind of a thrill to see it. We had a local photographer take pictures of things when my brother won something. We saw it in the newspaper. And then one of my classmates' mothers was a writer for a magazine that I loved called the Philadelphia Magazine. And it was just a great magazine. It still exists today. I loved the writing and I really admired her mom and her persona. And I also just loved writing. But the final thing I wanted to mention is that in the 1972 election, I was in middle school at the time, and we did a full school election role play. And so I was a reporter, and then I also got to play Maria Shriver. And actually, Sergeant Shriver came to our school as sort of the culminating event, and the TV station and the local newspaper was there. And so seeing all of that, like something happening in a middle school in the local paper was like this big thing. And it made the journalists seem up close. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to share those. Does that jog anything for anyone else? Like, what were your experiences with local journalism and how did they influence your vision of what you could do, how you could influence and have an impact on your local community? Yes.
I grew up in Ontario, California, and was a local newspaper. And fortunately, I mean, my family didn't have much money at all, but my father also subscribed to the LA Times. So of course, it's like everyone said, I mean, it was the radio, the television was terrible. So I would see this local newspaper, what they were covering, what was important, but then because I had this experience of the LA Times coming, and then I had all of that. And so that just started to open up. The sports, Murray was
Oh yeah, Jim Murray. Yeah, I remember him.
And then the international news. And as I was getting older, then suddenly I was involved in it. The whole thing around Vietnam. And so we were getting all of that. And the local paper wasn't covering that unless it was obituaries or some local bureau. And then that just opened my whole world up.
Yeah, so just having all those media sources in Ontario, California, for the local paper and the LA Times and the international coverage during Vietnam. Yeah, thank you. Opened up your world. That's a really interesting way to put it.
Through the early 60s until I ended up in Vietnam.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So that was.
Thank you for your service, right? Yeah.
This side of me also subscribed to Time Magazine.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was getting obviously a little biased, but
Yeah.
affected me.
Yeah, but I think it seems to me that we're all aware of any news. You can sort of feel in your bones what a bias is coming from a certain article, and we can handle that. You know, we can handle conflicting information. We really can. But these idiots on TV do not understand that.
Yeah.
Well, another case in point.
Yeah.
David Brooks just retired as a runner for the.
Yeah.
And I just see this whole metamorphosis prior to Obama and bad mouth, and I just kept shit. But I kept reading because he could write, and I've read a couple of his books, and he gets all philosophical bit and starts to quote Greek philosophers. But now it's really interesting to see how he evolved, and he was willing to admit to that. Still a conservative, center right. But it was interesting to see his evolution.
Right. So you have this relationship almost like with David Brooks as he's moved from being very conservative to middle of the road.
Well, for my thinking, I want to read the other point of view. I want to understand how people are thinking, how their brain works. So stuff makes sense to them. And how is that? How does it work? You know, I have my limits.
I don't know. Anyone else have any other, or is it? Yes.
I just want to add, because I came from a teaching background, you know, in the schools here.
Yeah.
And what motivated me to want to always have that influence in my teaching is I got it when I went to school. And newspapers, when you talk about the number of papers you had around you in your home, but our schools had that as well.
Yeah, true.
The tables in the library, they were available for kids whose parents maybe didn't have 4 different subscriptions. So it was a way of gathering information and news. And interestingly enough, when my father came back from World War II, he read to us at night, but instead of reading fairy tales, he read us the news.
Oh, wow.
Because it was the first time he had time to sit down.
That's great.
And actually relax. And I think he used it in retrospect. I think he used it as a way of relaxing himself, but also keeping up, because he stayed in the military after he came home. That's just the sidebar. So the news can come in many ways, and the framing of how one processes news and how we want news can start very young. And so my postscript to this is, I think we lost people like myself who put that as an anchor in my program. When I retired, I tried to keep it going. And there was no groundswell, there was no money, there was only, crazy directions going off. Well, now we can do it all online, but it's not the same online. You don't get the oral voice off.
Right.
And it is that the oratory is often, for me, a way of engaging young people.
Wow.
And I sure took hard knocks doing it at Santa Cruz High.
Yes, you did.
And, I had to go apologize to Canfield, and I had lots of weird stories, but I didn't care, because it got these kids doing and thinking, and they were proud of what they created. And we've got many people in our community now who are a result of that wonderful newspaper that now does.
I love what you said, and I'm not going to be able to do justice to all of that, but I love your story about teaching journalism, integrating it into education, providing other ways to get it besides a subscription.
Yeah.
And then I love the tale about your father reading the newspaper to you when he came home from work at night. Yeah. Yeah, but those were the bedtime stories. That's incredible. So, okay, thank you for that. And now more from Tom. So this is a picture. I don't know if you can see. This is like, where's Waldo? If you can see Tom, probably not.
Well, there's, you can see, this is about 1978, maybe. Very good looking man is at the very rear. Standing there, that is Fred McPherson Jr., who was the publisher of the paper. Scotchy, there, that's Wallace Wood. Scotchy is next to him, and then you'll see Bruce McPherson.
I don't see Bruce. Where is
Yeah,
is
right
that?
there.
There's
That
Bruce.
is
Look at
Bruce.
his hair. Wow. Okay.
And looking at that, it makes me think it was really a team effort, and we got along amazingly. It was the other difference is we all were at work at the same time. It was an afternoon paper, and we come together about 7 o'clock, work like hell until noon, and then if you were done, you went straight to the bar or straight to the gymnasium to work out.
Yeah.
One or the other.
Yeah.
But also somebody brought up advertising, and there are a couple of issues there. People actually bought the paper for advertising, and newspaper people, the editorial side will not admit that or know that.
Exactly.
And that is important. There are all aspects to a daily newspaper, especially in those days, that has kind of fallen apart a little bit. I'll give you an example, the bridge column.
Yeah.
How many people read bridge columns?
Well, my mom did.
Okay. Okay, that's about right, about two of you. If we don't run the bridge column, I can assure you that one of the two of you will be on the phone yelling at me. And that was the beauty of a newspaper, is it was a general information piece of information coming in with advertising and classified ads, for God's sake. We had 10 pages of classified ads. And that, we'll talk about this later, but economically, that all worked to make the newspaper a lot more lively and able to have enough resources to to live up to this goal that we have of an informed society, an informed local society, which I feel for most people is more important even than what's happening in the state or national. We at least can agree on our local stuff, and that's what we did well in those days.
So I'm gonna move you. I see we have about, do we have about 15 minutes left?
Yeah.
Is that correct? So mindful of
It's not
time,
fast.
that let's go back again to your days as a reporter on the mass murders and those court cases. And I know you were saying how important it was. It wasn't just the salaciousness of it. It was getting accurate information out and teaching people about different aspects of law enforcement as well as
Right.
the legal procedures and process.
I didn't ever go to law school. I have a BA degree, I have a very ordinary education. But I was like, I had a graduate level course in law enforcement and justice when the mass murders came around. And looking back on it, I can't believe the talent and the intelligence and the work that some of the people did that all were involved in that case. You had judges who were brilliant, but lucky enough to have the daughter of a judge here, who was one of my favorite people of all time, Charles Franich, who I got to sit in his courtroom hour after hour and watch him kind of dodge and weave and get through the law and he was somebody who did what good reporters did. He explained what he did, and I'm getting an education sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
I got to know and meet with defense lawyers and understand where they're coming from, and it was like a graduate school for me, covering that case. And I was of course, you're moved by what happened and the seriousness of it all, but what was interesting is I felt like the readership paid attention and got an education as much of how you handle cases like this. And not only that, we're confident that the system worked. And the way that came out was prosecution did well, defense did well, cops did well. The cops did amazingly well. When you have two mass murders going on at once and bodies floating in from everywhere, how the hell do you track what it is? And they stayed on it. And I think all of us kind of contributed to the point where Stony Brook is in the back. Stony is one of my best friends ever. He and I go back to that time. And you establish a relationship that if it lasts that long, it must have really meant something. And
I'm going to move you.
Go ahead.
Okay. So then
I do get going.
you
Sorry.
become, no worries. And by the way, it's like that for any beat reporter is learning. You're getting a graduate degree in urban planning, whatever. Okay. So then you become an editor. And of course, the big story is that earthquake. And again, there you saw how people depended on the newspaper and how people didn't understand how hard it was for you to put the paper out because your press got damaged for a few days. Why don't you tell that story and how the stories kind of brought the community together?
At the time I was working the night desk. I was doing the page one design, and the earthquake hit and knocked us out, knocked the press off its bearings. We had no power, and so we're sitting in a dark newsroom, or actually out in the parking lot next to us because we all ran out from the building. But immediately we went to work, and what I noticed is the staff really cooperated in a way that was impressive. Even people who didn't like each other, and there was one actual kind of fisticuffs during the quake when two people were diving under one desk and one got mad at the other and punched him, and that was worked out. That was no big deal. But we worked together, and
the competition, the Merc.
Yeah, we printed at the Mercury. We took all our stuff over and worked on their computer system, and then it would truck back in. And one thing I didn't appreciate until that time was when the papers finally did come, they opened Highway 17 for us, the CHP did, and brought trucks over of the newspapers. And when the trucks arrived, people were gathering when they arrived kind of up on Mission Street, and they were waiting for the paper, and it was the clue to them the situation is normal. We still have a newspaper. We have, things are working, and it was really ended up being an important thing. And that's, you know, the biggest story that we'll ever have. Again, it was controversial. I don't have to point out that's a very gory shot over on the left. One hell of a news shot,
Yeah,
and we were really roundly criticized.
got a lot of, yeah, whenever you show something,
But it's
visceral.
it's an
Yeah.
incredible news shot. I didn't feel I could. It was my call. I did it.
And then look, we have our, I guess he was vice president at the
Yeah,
time,
Bush.
right there.
He was president.
Oh, was he
Yeah,
president
he was
then? Okay.
president. He came here and I
Came.
didn't get to go.
Oh,
because
president. Yeah, there he is.
I had to stay and design the front page.
Yeah.
Reporter got to go.
Then this other one, you can't really see it, but we have circled some stories here. Beach Flats plan up for discussion
Yeah.
with a little graphic, and then Watsonville eyeing, the good old eyeing is a verb, wetlands for housing. These are what we call the dull but important stories,
Yeah.
right? That I
That's
don't even know if anyone's doing that anymore, but yeah. But anyway, talk about how you would decide to do those and how you try to entice people to
But
look at them. Yeah.
what we're losing, another thing we're losing in newspapers that I think we used to have and do a pretty good job of is, I've heard it referred to as stories that ooze. Stories that just slowly move, is that can be something like growth around Santa Cruz. Stories that are always around water, is a perfect example. We don't wake up after 5 years and say, hey, the tap didn't work, nothing came out. It's a big deal to figure your water supply. Sewage, you know, who wants to write about sewage? But those things are all important in a community. So how do you get them told? How do you make people understand? We tried everything. We would put it next to a story next to a wild stories that was sexy, and hope that people would kind of go to the next column over and get that. Or we would put a box around it, or featureize it. That was the other thing. I don't even know if that's a word. You would featureize it, and you would get these sort of long introductions about going back to somebody's experience in World War I, and then end up by talking about water today. So anything that we tried to do, all sorts of, those are examples. Sometimes just getting a nice photo to go with it is a way to do it. But those stories were important because ultimately there is that day where you're going to turn the tap on and the water doesn't come out, and you have to detail what happened. And I'd hate to go back to this theme, but we are kind of losing that. I learned that stuff was important. This really happened. I was sitting at my desk and they had raised the sewer rate in Live Oak, I think. And I'm sitting at my VDT, and I said, yeah, I want to put an interesting lead on this story. And the guy next to me said, well, what happened? I said, well, they raised the sewer rates, and and he said, why don't you report they raised the sewer rates? That's like a story all by itself. And
yeah, I was going to add to that is that the other thing that I worry about, I guess now, is these processes, the professionalism. I kind of came up through that Watergate era where, we're not supposed to trust, the government and all, bureaucrats and all this other stuff. And I got to tell you, I came in with that was my frame. And by the end of covering these people, they were my best friends. I mean, not to say they were co-opting me. That isn't what I'm saying. They understood. These were professionals. They understood what their field was, whether it was law enforcement or urban planning or traffic, transportation, all the stuff, the infrastructure that no one thinks about until it breaks, right? And then it's like, pitchforks, Well, there are these professionals who are actually watching all of that, and they have a whole culture around what they do. And I felt like part of my job was to explain that a little bit, make it interesting. You had to have a news hook usually, but I feel what my concern is today, when I look at some of my peers, I mean, no one in my age group, I'm 65 now, no one was reading the newspaper, none of my peers. So anyone 65 and younger, in my opinion, is basically not reading the newspaper, haven't most of their lives, and nor do their kids. And what I experienced with my own peers is when I was living in San Mateo for a while, when I go to a local planning meeting and we'd be trying to talk about construction issues in our neighborhood, my neighbors had no clue. no clue how any of that worked. I did. So I could go read the background materials, I could look at all the planning documents, and I could write a very powerful targeted letter that says, yes, we have to keep building, but we need to have a carve out so that you're not holding up the traffic and people can drop people off. What stuff like that, like you're part of the solution. But I just am very concerned that I just don't see that as a literacy, like a civic literacy. So anyway, I think we have.
Minutes, so what do we?
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, close with you all a little bit, which is, I wanted to understand, you heard me, I've described how we got engaged with our community through the local news. I want to hear from you all, because you're all part of the same generation. I mean, can you think of a story that you thought, I'm going to go do something about that after you read it? Or it helped you just to understand a civic issue in a new light. Like maybe you came to it with a bias and you're like, oh, I actually learned something else. And what motivates you now to get involved in community and to try to understand local issues? And what makes it hard for you to do so? You can take any of those questions. I've asked a ton, but I'm just curious if you can remember any of those stories in your own lifetime. Yes.
And demonstrations, because, back when I was young, we did all that, and I thought, okay, and it's like, why bother? But seeing all the people and the young people, it is inspiring to, okay, I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, seeing the coverage of the No Kings nowadays, you're like, hey, we're still doing it. Yeah. Thank you.
The library issue,
Mhm.
so involved in that, and to see it happening the way it's happening.
The banning of books, you mean? Yeah.
No, downtown library.
Ah,
And I went around houses, like, don't give us my trees, and all of that.
oh,
And it's all that, all things.
yes.
I lived downtown, I lived in 5 places within a mile downtown. And I just go, and it has to be, I get it from me places, but it's really hard.
Yes. Yes. But you have to hear what everyone says.
You have to listen.
And you have to work through it. There's probably going to be a compromise and people aren't going to like it. Yeah, but yeah.
You drive by and see River Road. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, I realize there's 2 sides to all this, but it's very difficult for me.
It's hard to see a change. It really is.
I live in 5 states and 2 countries.
Oh,
I choose to live here because of why I live here.
yeah.
So
Well,
it's hard.
stay involved, but it is hard. It's hard because you're not seeing, like you're not always getting your.
Well, it's not, I see all the reasons or try to.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I have a 14-year-old granddaughter, what's happening to her?
Yeah.
What's gonna be like? It's hard.
Right.
Hard.
Yeah.
I like reading about, I think there are a couple of different columns, the ocean in our backyard.
Yes.
I think that really anchors us
Yeah.
specifically to our community. So we know what's going on.
Yeah, I agree.
I like that.
The comment was that, we call them our ocean backyard, some of the more nature oriented stories in the paper, written by not journalists, but by the scientists sometimes in the field. And I have to give credit to the Sentinel now about getting the community voice in the paper, particularly on Sunday, which is when that column runs. I think that is something that they deserve credit for. I agree.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
The BOEM offshore drilling, was the first time I've seen the leasing opening coming up right after they had closed all the comments on it. And so then I just spread it to everybody I knew, and I said, go out and comment. And it was really nice to see residents here activate. And
did you feel that you were getting them involved and that they were helping them tell that was going to be a problem?
yes, because many did not know about this last leasing that they opened up after that whole public comment closed. So
wow.
Yeah, I only saw it in the Sentinel.
Wow. Okay. I missed that story, but that's it sounds like it was not quite according to Hoyle, right? They closed the public comment. You thought you already had a decision made. And now they slipped something in. Is that what you're saying?
Opened it up for industry to bid for leases.
Right.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta keep
And
your
that-
eyes
those
open.
Details need to be brought public.
But see, good for you that you understood, like you read the story and you understood, I need to get involved. And you knew how to get involved and how to get your other neighbors and friends activated.
When you had support, because you feel like you're the only board.
Right.
So it was the Sentinel that actually brought that up.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I thought, oh, no, I'm not gonna do any of that, but, to me, it's totally important. And to Santa Cruz, so anybody that has a vested investment in Santa Cruz, who cares about this area, at least it was very passionate for me.
Yeah, no,
Absolutely.
exactly.
Well, I might leave it this way.
Yeah.
To put a
Mhm.
bow on it. With what we just talked about in the last hour. What's happening today is information is pouring in. We're getting more without even trying it to hear. We're hearing it from everywhere about everybody's goddamn opinion. And they're fighting to let all their information in. What isn't coming in is middle of the road, informed, intelligent discussion. That has to work to get into your newsfeed. And that's the challenge for all of us, I think, is how do we shut out the noise to all the people who want you to listen to them and them only. We need to tune them out and we need to bring in real information and work hard at it. That's what I did in 1972, and that's what I try to do today.
Right.
And that's my story.
Thank you. I know we can share the deck with you and you can also follow up on the recommended cited books and articles if you want. And next time we'll talk about the evolution and unfortunately, I think it's fair to say collapse of the newspaper business model. So next time will be a little bit of a bummer, but it's the truth. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the last day. Put the chairs down outside, so we should bring the chairs outside and Eric and outside.
Okay.